I distinctly remember when Black Panther was coming out. I remember being in my college theater. Right before class started, one of my classmates was talking about it. At the time, I hadn't seen it yet. I didn't know much about Black Panther, so I wasn't really expecting much. However, listening to this classmate talk about this new movie made me hyped. He threw around words like phenomenal, it was the best Marvel movie, and he's seen it 5 times already. I was understandably intrigued. So I asked him those magic words that every comic book fan asks. Was it as good as The Dark Knight? And you know what he said? Better. My world was shook. The hype I'd been hearing was apparently real, and the voices of millions saying it's the best movie ever must be true. The following weekend, I went to go see Black Panther for the first time, and I was so confused. This was the movie that's better than The Dark Knight? Seriously? Yeah, Killmonger had some depth, and Wakanda was interesting if you like CGI cities, but everything else? It was just another by-the-numbers, formulaic Marvel movie with a weak ending where the villain had the same powers as the hero. The buzz surrounding how amazing this movie was just kept growing, and I felt like the dude from Network. Eventually, the buzz died down around this movie, and I was left to ponder it in my little cave. 4 years later, its sequel was released, Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. After Chadwick Boseman's tragic passing, I was immensely curious as to what they had planned for this movie. Little bits and pieces had leaked about it, but nothing concrete. Then the movie was released, and there was like next to no buzz. Nothing in comparison to the first movie. But me being the diehard comic book fan that I am, I had to go see it despite my expectations being low. The first one burned me pretty badly, and the fact that no one was talking about this new one made me feel as if it was going to repeat its prior mistakes. I go to the theater, I sit down, and the movie starts. And holy shit, Black Panther: Wakanda Forever is probably one of my favorite MCU movies released to date. Wakanda Forever is so much better than Black Panther. It surpasses it in so many ways, yet most importantly, Wakanda Forever is better than Black Panther for 2 simple facts. It has an active protagonist, and its tone matches the plot. Before we really dive into the meat of this video, allow me to state the obvious. Black Panther wasn't just a massive success because it's a fantastic movie. It's not a fantastic movie because of the plot. It's a fantastic movie because of what it represents. Historically, people of color were not often seen in old cinema. If they were, oftentimes it would be a person using blackface to portray an African American in insulting, stereotypical, and demeaning ways. This went on for decades. While African American entertainers eventually made their way to the big screen, they didn't have the same positive publicity as their white counterparts. The portrayal of African Americans throughout film, while evolving, has always been consistent in making them background characters, comic relief, supporting characters, and rarely the protagonist. And if they were the protagonist, then the plot typically involved drugs and gang violence. Not only does this film make the protagonist a person of color, but the entire world and nation in which they come from has people who look like, sound like, and ultimately represent the Black community. This movie has African representation as well as African American representation. It's still very rare to see an accurate representation of African American and African culture in media. In many movies, Black people are often tokenized and Black characters are over-exaggerated caricatures of how white people perceive Black folks. However, Black Panther made a point of showing the intelligence and power of each character rather than portraying them as victims of oppression and hardship. We saw a nation of Black individuals who are not only extremely intelligent, but passionately embrace the culture of their ancestors. This film also created roles for so many actors known within the Black community, but perhaps not known to anyone else. This movie created exposure, gave opportunities, uplifted and encouraged so many young, impressionable Black children to be more than what they are. Black Panther had representation that went beyond what we saw in the movie itself. In addition to having a prestigious, predominantly Black cast, Black Panther also had Black writers, executives, and musicians, all of who contributed to the movie and its representation in meaningful ways. It's important to highlight that because in cases where Black folks get represented on screen, it's rarely off-screen as well. This is why Black Panther was so groundbreaking. It's because Marvel placed the movie in the hands of Black talent, and in the process, showed that they trusted that they would do something amazing with the movie, which says a lot. Now, the topic of representation in itself could be its own separate video, and we'd be here for a long time discussing the nuances of it, but also I don't know if I'm necessarily equipped to discuss all of the nuances, because Yeah. So for the purposes of this video, try to separate the cultural impact this film had from the story it was trying to tell. Again, this was a fantastic film in terms of representation. I'm not arguing that. I'm strictly discussing the narrative and why I felt it was lacking in a lot of ways and why its sequel had the superior story. Now that that's all out of the way, let's finally get into it. The biggest thing I've noticed when comparing Black Panther to Wakanda Forever is the differences between Shuri and T'Challa. T'Challa is a totally reactionary protagonist. Throughout Black Panther, T'Challa is just along for the ride. He doesn't really do anything without the go-ahead of someone else or without someone else, in some way, pushing him towards one decision. The only thing he initiates is the hunt for Claw. Everything else after that is in the hands of someone else. T'Challa doesn't progress the plot, and most of the major conflicts are handled by others. Hell, he never even finishes any fight scene on his own. In the beginning, he's kicking ass, but when a hostage is taken, Nokiaa takes over. When Claw's on the run in South Korea, T'Challa catches him and is about to kill him before Okoye tells him no. Killmonger easily whoops his ass during the duel and is about to kill him, but Zuri steps in. And during the final battle, most of all the important tasks are being accomplished by allies while he is fighting Killmonger, who, yes, he does actually beat, but in the end, Killmonger makes the decision to die. And speaking of Killmonger, he's really the one driving the plot. Every scene Killmonger is in progresses the plot in meaningful ways. He's a very active antagonist, whilst T'Challa is a very reactive protagonist. Anything T'Challa wants to do, he has to go through his family first. Anything Killmonger wants to do, he just does. And perhaps what makes the lack of action on T'Challa's part even worse is not only the fact that he doesn't do anything, but by the fact that he's basically invincible too. When taking the herb, T'Challa is enhanced in a multitude of ways, and on top of that, he has a nearly invincible suit of armor. The reason this issue doesn't apply to, say, Iron Man is because the dude gets his ass kicked and his armor destroyed all the time. Yet we see he's capable without it too. Just look at Iron Man 3. T'Challa, on the other hand, as soon as he loses his power, he is easily beaten, and the only way for him to win in the end is for him to take the herb and get the suit. T'Challa is also basically loved by everyone. He's the noble king, he's a family man, and he himself can't do anything wrong. Yet his family sure can. I've seen a couple instances of T'Challa in this movie being compared to Superman. They're both perfect and both invincible, which is not interesting. What makes a character interesting is their flaws. The best Superman stories show Clark as a kind-hearted, imperfect man. Sure, he's invincible and can fly, but that's not what makes him or his stories compelling. What makes him interesting is his humanity and the fact that he's kind to a fault. T'Challa is missing this imperfect side to him. He is the noble king who is also kind to a fault, yet we never see the fault. No one tries to take advantage of his good-hearted nature, and no one tries to manipulate him because he's never the one making all the decisions. T'Challa has a perfect suit, a perfect set of powers, and is the perfect king. And all that is the perfect recipe for bland storytelling. On the flip side, Shuri is literally everything T'Challa is not. Shuri is extremely imperfect, and Shuri drives the plot. She's brash, hot-headed, and somewhat full of herself. And after Namor is introduced, Shuri is the one leading the charge to find out who the scientist is, what Namor plans to do, how to stop him, and how to bring back Wakanda's protector. Sure, Nokiaa, Okoye, and Ramonda drive the plot in their own ways, but Shuri is the one who ultimately decides the fate of Wakanda. What makes this even more interesting is that Shuri is directly compared to Killmonger in the film, meaning she's being directly compared to the one who completely drove the prior film. So it's no wonder, since her character is basically an echo of Killmonger, that she is constantly pushing the plot forward. And it's something to note that, yes, most conflicts in this film were avoided by Shuri until the end. Shuri was unconscious when the Talokanil attacked Okoye on the bridge, Nokiaa infiltrated Talokan and extracted her, and she was kind of in a support role when Namor attacked Wakanda and killed Ramonda. The only time she participates in a conflict is in the end with the final fight against Namor. Why this works for Shuri and not T'Challa is because, in terms of Shuri's character development, it makes total sense. She's literally being pushed to become a driving force. T'Challa, and Ramonda are all gone, and she's all that's left. She was the goofy little sister who just wanted to do her own thing and chill in her lab. She never had agency. She never needed to have agency, because she never thought she would have to be the ruler or the Black Panther. But since things out of her control forced her into becoming something she wasn't prepared for, she has to adapt. And just because she's not participating in these conflicts doesn't mean she's not an active protagonist. However, since she hadn't been fighting all throughout the movie, in the end, her decision to take the herb, use the suit, and fight Namor makes it all the more impactful. Now, I can already hear people typing away saying something like, well, why is it okay that Shuri needs the herb to win, but it's bad when T'Challa uses it? To that, I say that the character arcs that these two are on call for completely different endings. T'Challa, the protector of Wakanda, lost horribly without the use of the herb or suit, and the only thing he proved in the end was that he needed both to win. T'Challa's whole arc in Black Panther is about how he wants to help Wakanda and protect it. And for someone who is supposed to be the protector of Wakanda and also prides himself on it, you'd think this embarrassing loss would make him want to prove to himself that he doesn't need the crutch, that he can be the protector Wakanda deserves without the need for any enhancements. If T'Challa would have not used the herb and rocked up to the final fight wearing a makeshift Black Panther costume against Killmonger, who has the suit and the powers, and whooped his ass, it would have been far more satisfying and proved to everyone that T'Challa is indeed the protector of Wakanda, completing his arc in a satisfying way. Shuri, on the other hand, never wanted to be the protector. She just wanted to be a side character. She didn't want to be in the limelight, yet she's then all of a sudden forced into fighting Namor and ultimately deciding the fate of Wakanda. For her, it's not about proving how good of a protector she is. She doesn't want to be the Black Panther, yet the title of protector is forced upon her. So it's no wonder that she used the herb in the suit to beat Namor. She doesn't care that she needs a crutch. The only reason she finished making a synthetic herb was to use its power to kill Namor. She did it out of spite, the exact same reason why Killmonger took the herb in the suit in the first place. But in the end, it's the thought of her brother that makes her spare Namor. It's that she realizes she took the Killmonger path when she should have taken the T'Challa path. And while this ending was good, if T'Challa didn't use the herb or the suit in the prior film, this revelation with all the Killmonger allegories would have hit so much harder and been an even more satisfying ending than it already was. When comparing the narratives of Black Panther and Wakanda Forever, you'll quickly find some similarities. Both are stories revolving around the potential fall of Wakanda as a result of some outside force. Both are commentaries on the destructive nature of colonialism, and both showcase our central protagonist going through a series of events with said outside force that fundamentally changes their perception of the world at large. While obviously there are many nuances to their respective stories, the themes are very much alike. Yet the tone is vastly different. Tone is typically described as the mood implied by an author's word choice and the way that the text can make the reader feel. Or in this case, the mood implied by the screenwriter and director's choices. Clearly defining tone is very hard, but basically it's incredibly subjective. It's not a concrete thing, rather it's about how something personally affects an individual. So what I'm about to talk about will be far more subjective than anything else I've said prior, because to me, Black Panther's tone, for the most part, feels fun and joyful. But when looking at what the story entails, it should be anything but. Everything in this film felt light, like your typical by-the-numbers Marvel movie. It was light, it was comedic, and part of me wonders if it's because this was Ryan Coogler's first Marvel movie and they made him write and direct this film within their strict formula. Again, it's a totally subjective thing, but I just feel as if the tone of this movie was far too light for the subject matter. For as serious as the subject matter was, the tone being conveyed didn't reflect it at all. I honestly think it may have been the music choices, being too poppy for lack of a better word. As I said prior, tone is typically described as the mood implied by an author's word choice and the way the text can make a reader feel. Obviously, a director can't use proper word choice to affect the way you feel, however, they can use music. And the soundtrack, well, fantastic in its own right, didn't fit with the story they were trying to tell, and in the end created a disjointed tone from the narrative. As for the tone of Wakanda Forever, it feels sad and melancholic. Obviously, a major factor in this is Chadwick Boseman's passing. Yet it's not just that. The whole point of the story is about loss, growth, and transformation, and the tone and story reflect that perfectly. Wakanda Forever is what I'd describe as an atypical tragedy. It's a tragedy that ends hopefully. Tragedies typically end in death, but in this instance, it's the death of Shuri's fire. It's the death of her past and her rebirth into something new and better than before. The somber, melancholic tone held all throughout the film is still held in the end, despite it ending on a hopeful note. And all throughout the film, loss is felt in almost every scene. And the music, or lack thereof, is reflective of that. When Riri, Shuri, and Okoye are escaping the cops, a bop is playing because they're just trying to run away. Their lives aren't really in danger, so the music doesn't really need to be dramatic. Yet when Okoye and Atuma fight on the bridge, there's no music. It's warrior versus warrior that ends in Okoye failing at her one job. When Talokan attacks Wakanda, there's not some bop playing in the background when people are drowning. It's somber. And when Shuri and Namor fight in the end, as soon as things get serious, all music cuts. It doesn't fade out, it just cuts right as she's stabbed, implying, oh shit, things just got beyond serious. Music is instrumental in establishing the tone of the film. Hell, even when Shuri and Riri were having that science sis montage, the music by Burna Boy was perfect because it's subtle and not over the top. If the guitar melody was replaced with some poppy synthesized song, that scene would feel extremely cheesy. That's how important music is to a scene. I would have loved to showcase just what I'm talking about with the music affecting the tone, but you know, YouTube isn't too kind when it comes to music. So I suggest rewatching these movies and really focus on how the music truly affects the tone of a scene. The fact that Shuri is an active, broken, and relatable protagonist makes her all the more compelling in comparison to her brother. Couple that with the fact that Wakanda Forever's tone is consistent with its story, and the end result is one of the best Marvel movies in the MCU. T'Challa was extremely one-note, and Black Panther was a tonal mess. And sadly, due to Chadwick Boseman's passing, we'll never get to see his version of T'Challa grow and become more nuanced. I think a lot of my criticisms of Black Panther stem from the fact that I just wanted it to be better because I could see the groundwork for greatness, and Wakanda Forever proved me right. While I didn't like Black Panther, I loved what it represented. It was the first time we had seen anything like that at the movies, and it was truly monumental for that fact alone. I'm very pleased to say Wakanda Forever finally gave me that feeling of enjoyment that the first did for so many. Having Shuri be an active protagonist and drive the plot the same way that the antagonist of the first film did easily made Black Panther Wakanda Forever one of my favorite Marvel movies of all time. But what did you all think? Were you in the same boat as I was in regards to the first Black Panther? Do you agree with anything I said? Do you disagree? Let's talk about it in the comments below. Thank you all so much for watching. Until next time, take care.